Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into something pretty complex: leadership. Specifically, how leadership shifts when things get really tough, like in a crisis.
Right. And we're honing in on this, well, this puzzle. Why do authoritarian leaders often seem so appealing when everything's falling apart?
Yeah, when, logically, or at least looking back, a more democratic style seems much better for long-term health, for resilience.
Exactly. And we're basing this deep dive on a really insightful article by Christian Rook. It's from the Wake Up Call newsletter, the 32nd edition.
Ah, Christian Roque, he's got that interesting background, right?
Yeah.
Interim manager, consultant, coach.
Yeah, he's been in the trenches helping companies navigate these exact situations. He's seen it firsthand, which really comes through in the writing.
Okay, so our mission today is basically to unpack Christian's insights, get a handle on why this contrast exists between, the tough leader and the more collaborative one, especially in a crisis.
And figure out what that means for actually building organizations that don't just, well, survive a crisis, but maybe even get stronger.
Okay, so where does Rook start? What's the scene like in a company that's hit the rocks?
Well, he paints a picture of fear, mostly,
Yeah.
uncertainty. People are genuinely worried. Is the company going under? What about my job? It's an anxious environment.
Totally understandable. And in that kind of atmosphere, what's the knee-jerk reaction leadership-wise?
He called it the path of least resistance, which often looks like slamming the gates shut, going fully top-down,
Right.
autocratic,
Swift decisions, no debate.
pretty much. Swift, often really harsh cost-cutting. Forget transparency, forget open discussion, forget even sharing much information. It's just focus, a brutal kind of focus.
He had that quote, didn't he? Something about the apple.
Yeah, we must remove the rotten parts of the apple to save the fruit, almost. It's vivid.
It is. Sounds like painful surgery is needed.
And that's where this figure, the tough fixer, becomes, well, incredibly attractive.
The person who's not afraid to make the hard calls.
Exactly. The one who dares to break the rules, confronts people head on, doesn't compromise, says the things everyone else is supposedly thinking but won't say out loud.
And often they're an outsider, yeah. The hired gun.
Very often. It's a familiar script. But Rook goes deeper than just, standard management theory here.
How so?
He brings in psychology. Specifically, the idea of revenge as a hidden engine driving this type of crisis leadership.
Revenge in a boardroom. That sounds intense.
It does, but think about it. When a company feels threatened, maybe by competitors or customers leaving or even internal failures, a collective feeling can build up, a sense of injustice, betrayal even.
Like, this shouldn't be happening to us. Someone's to blame.
Precisely. And that creates this desire, maybe subconscious, maybe not, to set things right, to get even.
So who are the targets? Who's this revenge aimed at?
Could be anyone perceived as the source of the injustice. Those unfair competitors, ungrateful customers, suppliers jacking up prices, investors pulling back.
But internal targets, too.
Oh, absolutely. Internal leadership cliques seen as incompetent, maybe corrupt. There's this undercurrent of hope that the tough fixer will finally do what needed to be done ages ago. Clean house.
He gave that example, didn't he? About the big sales cars?
Yeah, with the rusting brake discs. It seems small, but it symbolized this deep frustration. Management seemed weak. Maybe they had skeletons in the closet, couldn't control this privileged group. It taps into real emotion.
So the authoritarian leader isn't just promising order, they're promising payback.
In a way, yes. They become the vessel for that collective anger. They're the one who'll sweep through with an iron broom, take action, punish the guilty.
Which explains why people might follow them, even against their better judgment sometimes. It's not just about feeling safe.
Rook argues it's definitely not just about safety or clarity. It's also about that promise of vicarious revenge. The leader acts out the anger the group feels.
They'll crack down, show who's boss, teach them a lesson, that kind of language.
Exactly. It taps into something very fundamental about perceived justice.
And does this feed on itself? Like, the more victimized a company feels.
The more it craves that strong leader.
Yeah.
Yes. If the narrative is all about external blame, the customers are too big, the market's rigged, the yearning for someone decisive just grows.
And people might even trade autonomy for that feeling? Give up having a say if someone's finally acting on their behalf?
Rook observes that, yes, if the leader channels their frustration, they might accept a less participation. And he notes this isn't just a business thing. You see it in politics, too.
That machinery company example was stark. Cheering when they cut ties with a partner.
Yeah, a euphoric reaction, he called it. It felt good because the partner's terms had gotten worse. It felt like striking back.
But strategically.
A disaster. Cost them a huge market share. Emotion won out over economics. Revenge trumped reason.
So, okay, this revenge energy, it can work initially, get people moving.
Absolutely. It can create this intense us versus them energy.
Right.
Teams pull together, work harder, accept sacrifices. It's a powerful, short-term mobilizer.
Short term being the key phrase.
Absolutely critical. Rook's point is, this fuel source runs out. It's not sustainable.
Why not? Why does the revenge energy fade?
Because it needs a clear enemy. Once that enemy is gone, or the situation just changes and becomes more complex, the emotional charge dissipates.
And then what?
Then the authoritarian structure you built on that emotion becomes a problem. You needed a hammer, maybe, but now you need a whole toolkit, and all you have is the hammer. Blunt force doesn't work for nuanced problems.
Right. Which leads to the next big issue Rook raises, the isolation of that leader.
Yes, that initial support starts to curdle, almost. It turns inward. Anyone with a different opinion gets shut down.
Ignored, pushed out,
Systematically. Dissent isn't tolerated.
creating the classic echo chamber. Very dangerous.
Extremely. Because complex problems get oversimplified. The leader only hears confirmation bias reflected back by loyalists. Bad news doesn't travel up.
Even those simple orders like cut costs might show quick results at first.
They might, especially if there's low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
But when the crisis drags on or the challenges change, that one-dimensional thinking is crippling. Think about that tech company example he gave.
Obsessed with cost cutting.
While competitors were innovating right past them, they were rearranging deck chairs while the ship was, well, maybe not sinking, but certainly heading for the rocks technologically.
And the CEO example, firing the bottom 10%.
Yeah, applying that rigid Jack Welch rule, but to top engineers and execs. Losing smart, competent people, often with huge severance costs, just because they dared to question the strategy. Criticism wasn't just unwelcome, it was actively punished.
That suppression of dissent, it feels directly linked to the next point, management tunnel vision.
It is. They become hyper-focused on the immediate, loudest problems, the fires right in front of them.
And miss everything on the periphery.
Crucially, yes. Strategic shifts, new market trends, quiet innovations, changing customer moods. All those weak signals just vanish from the radar.
The irony being that peripheral stuff is often what determines long-term success.
Exactly. They're busy fighting old battles while the future's taking shape somewhere else entirely.
And Rook connects this to actual brain science, neuropsychology.
Yes, this is fascinating. It's not just psychology, it's neurochemistry. The idea of vicarious revenge, the leader acting for you, apparently triggers dopamine.
Seriously, your brain rewards you for this.
It seems so. It rewards that sense of loyalty, that feeling of justice being done, even if the actions are objectively damaging the company's future.
Wow. A biological feedback loop.
Kind of. And the research also suggests that these authoritarian environments actually dampen cognitive abilities. Critical thinking, creativity, innovation. They suffer. The brain goes into a sort of survival mode.
Prioritizing obedience over complex thought.
Basically, yes. Fast reactions over deep reasoning. So while they might look efficient for a bit, these organizations become, as Rook calls them, cognitive monocultures.
Meaning they lose the ability to adapt.
Precisely. Very vulnerable to surprises because they lack diverse thinking.
Okay, so if the authoritarian path leads to isolation, tunnel vision, and maybe even dumber organizations, what's the resilient alternative?
This is where Rook makes the case for democratic, or perhaps more accurately, situational leadership. Approaches that deliberately bring in multiple perspectives. Participation.
Like building an immune system for the organization against simplistic thinking.
That's a great analogy. He talks about cognitive diversity. Democratic processes, by their nature, force you to wrestle with different viewpoints. That's incredibly valuable, especially in complex crises where you can't afford blind spots.
And we know diverse teams perform better, right? Men, women, young, old, different backgrounds, even different personality types.
Absolutely. The evidence is pretty strong. Rook also points to studies showing that companies focusing on broader stakeholder value, which requires considering diverse interests, tend to be more profitable long-term than those purely focused on shareholder value, a narrower perspective.
It makes me think of Nassim Taleb's anti-fragility idea.
Yes. Good connection. A fragile thing breaks under stress. A robust thing resists it. But an anti-fragile thing actually gets stronger from stress, like muscles, or our immune system.
And democratic systems are more like that.
That's the argument. They learn from crises, they adapt, they improve, precisely because they have disagreement and feedback built in. They can self-correct.
Unlike authoritarian systems that crack or just become rigid because they silence the correctors.
Exactly. No feedback loop. And this difference shows up in loyalty, too. Authoritarianism runs on that hot, fleeting emotion of revenge. Democratic leadership builds on something cooler, more stable, trust, shared values, rational buy-in.
Feels much more solid.
It is. When people are involved in decisions, even tough ones, they understand the why. They own it more. That loyalty is rooted in relationships and purpose, not just temporary anger. It outlasts the crisis.
Rook uses some powerful comparisons, right? Tesla versus Toyota.
Yeah, Tesla and Musk, often seen as that kind of warrior leader figure, fighting enemies, driving hard, generates huge passion, but also volatility, erratic moves.
Whereas Toyota, with its Toyota Way, continuous improvement involving everyone.
Responded to the 2008 crisis methodically, collaboratively. Their path has been steadier, more resilient over the long haul.
And Amazon versus Patagonia.
Amazon? Explosive growth under Bezos's famously demanding top-down style. Effective for speed and scale, for sure.
But with costs.
Definitely. High turnover, labor issues, reputational hits. Patagonia, meanwhile, took a different route. Democratic, value-driven.
Smaller, yes, but Ruck argues more resilient. Amazing loyalty. And during COVID, they leaned on their people's creativity, while Amazon leaned on control and automation.
Again, it's not saying one is better at everything, but it highlights the trade-offs. The long-term fragility that can come with relying only on control versus the resilience built through participation.
But democratic leadership isn't a silver bullet either, is it? It can be slow, contentious.
Absolutely. Rook is clear on that. It's not about pure democracy all the time. That's where situational leadership fits in, adapting the style.
So an adaptive approach.
Exactly. Sometimes, in a real fire, you do need quick, decisive, maybe even authoritarian action. But the key is the adaptive leader keeps that phase short.
And crucially, they maintain trust.
Yes. Even when acting fast, they uphold respect, they explain why it has to be this way now, and they signal when the more inclusive discussion will come back. That preserves the underlying democratic values.
Avoids that slide into the echo chamber. And you need systems too, right? To stop the leader getting isolated.
Definitely. Things like strong advisory boards, maybe formal devil's advocate roles in meetings, real, honest employee feedback channels, ways to keep different perspectives flowing.
And the trick is keeping those channels open when the pressure is on, when the simple answer feels easiest.
That's the real test, because today's world, it feels like constant pressure, constant crisis, doesn't it? Climate, tech disruption, geopolitics. Complexity is the baseline now.
Which makes this whole discussion incredibly relevant.
Totally. In this environment, Rook argues, the weaknesses of pure authoritarianism are just magnified. The strengths of democratic adaptive approaches become essential, not just nice-to-haves. Trying to navigate today's world with simplistic, revenge-driven leadership, you'll just get swamped.
So the future belongs to leaders and organizations that embrace complexity, that build leadership systems for it.
That's his core message, drawn from all those turnarounds he's worked on. Openness, transparency, dialogue, courage. These aren't soft skills. They are critical for long-term success.
Sustainable recovery means engaging people, building trust, making space for disagreement.
The pull of the strong leader, the energy of revenge, it's real. It can work for a moment, but you have to consciously move past it if you want to endure.
And tap into the collective intelligence, the problem-solving power of the whole group.
Because in a complex world, silencing voices, relying on one perspective, Rook says you just can't afford to waste that cognitive capacity.
So investing in participation isn't just morally right, it's vital for survival, turning crisis into, well, an opportunity.
That really sums up the deep dive into Christian Rook's thinking from that wake-up call newsletter, Lecture 032. It's a stark contrast. The brittle fire of revenge-fueled leadership versus the durable, adaptive resilience built through participation and diverse thought.
And if you want to find out more about Christian Rook's work, remember, he's an interim manager, consultant, and coach. You can check out www.christianrook.com.
So maybe something to think about as you navigate things. Where do you see that pull of revenge versus the promise of resilience playing out? In your work, maybe, or just out in the world, and thinking about that cognitive diversity. What role can you play wherever you are to make sure more than just one voice shapes the decisions?